They assigned me the inversion homicide. That's not what they called it in the official dispatch, of course. The diplomatic corps has a talent for colorless language. To them, it was Incident 7 Sigma, the unexplained expiration of Principal Court. But I had seen the preliminary images, and I knew a more accurate term. An inversion. A clean flip of inside and out. The transfer shuttle decoupled, its magnetic clamps releasing. Through the viewport, the diplomatic courier Stellatus hung against the deep black. It wasn't beautiful. It was designed by my office, and we don't do beautiful. It was a seamless delta wing of an obsidian-hued metamaterial, a shape built to be an equation, not a vessel. It had no windows, no visible ports, no cosmetic flourishes. Its purpose was to be a perfect, self-contained bubble of reality, a vault for transporting a single, high-value asset. It was the flagship vessel for my Aegis protocol, a security suite I'd personally designed and staked my reputation on. It was advertised as impenetrable. The shuttle pilot, a man whose name I hadn't bothered to learn, remained silent. He knew who I was. Rhys Lorian, lead security architect. The man they call when a system doesn't just fail, but breaks the rules of its own existence. The murder of Ambassador Court wasn't just a security failure. It was a public execution of my life's work. A chime indicated we were docked. "We're here, Architect Lorian." "I am aware," I said, already unstrapping myself. The airlock opened onto the Stellatus' command center. Light was indirect, issuing from long seams where the walls met the floor and ceiling, creating a shadowless environment where everything felt exposed. There was no dust. The ship was a testament to order. And in the center of that order was the paradox. Ambassador Court sat in the central command throne. His uniform was immaculate. His hands rested on the armrests. His expression was placid. His skin, from his face to his boots, was completely intact. There was no blood, no wound, no mark of any kind. But on the pristine deck plates around the throne, his internal organs were arranged in a pattern of breathtaking precision. The liver here, the dual lobes of the lungs there, the stomach and intestines coiled like a diagram in a medical text. Each component was whole, undamaged, and glistening under the clinical light. They had been removed from inside him as if his skin were no more a barrier than a line drawn on a page. I approached, my boots making no sound on the deck. This wasn't a crime scene. It was a paradoxical data state. A system reporting two mutually exclusive truths, container-sealed, contents outside. My superiors wanted an assassin or a new kind of weapon. They wanted something they could classify, target, and neutralize. I wanted the flaw in the logic. "Stellan," I said to the open air. "Architect Lorian," a voice replied, emanating from the room itself. Stellan was the ship's sentient adjacent core, or SAC. Not a true creative AI. Those were far too prone to human-like error. Stellan was a vastly complex logic engine, designed for one purpose, to process data and maintain the integrity of its environment. "Report status," I commanded. "All systems are nominal," Stellan said. "The Aegis protocol remains unbroken. Hull integrity is at 100%. Life support is stable. There have been no unauthorized entries, no security alerts, and no unlogged activations of any ship system for the duration of the voyage. Scan the command center. Identify all biological matter." There was a brief pause. "Confirmed. One deceased human male, Principal Court. Multiple isolated human biological components, also belonging to Principal Court. No other life signs have been present since departure. No security breach. No weapon signature. No use of the ship's delamination transporter, our name for the teleportation system that deconstructs an object layer by layer, sends it as a data stream, and flawlessly reassembles it at the destination. The core principle of that system made this murder a definitional impossibility. You couldn't take the yolk out of an egg without breaking the shell. My mind began constructing the necessary hypotheses. 1. A new form of stealth teleportation, capable of targeting and extracting matter with a resolution fine enough to bypass the dermal barrier. Unlikely, but possible. 2. A traitorous flaw had been coded into Stellan itself, a backdoor that allowed it to perform this act and then erase the logs, more likely. The human element, the programmers, are always the weakest link. 3. A weapon that operates on a principle of physics we have yet to discover. I looked at the meticulous arrangement on the floor. The killer had arranged the organs with the care of a museum curator. I dismissed it. It was macabre theatrics, a pointless flourish designed to distract from the method. The human mind loves to assign meaning to patterns. A cognitive flaw I had trained myself to resist. The why was irrelevant. The how was everything. "Stellan," I said, my eyes tracing the lines of the scene, "I require full access to your deep core data logs. Every byte from the moment the ship was sealed. I am initiating a full system audit." "Access granted, Architect." I turned to a nearby console. The interface materialized as a field of light under my touch. This was my territory. In the raw data, somewhere within the terabytes of records from the ship's journey, there would be a single anomalous reading, a flash of energy, a misplaced packet of information, a quantum signature that didn't belong. It had to be there. Chaos is an illusion created by incomplete information. I initiated the command, watching the progress bar begin its slow crawl across the holographic display. I felt the anxiety in my gut begin to recede, replaced by the calm of a complex problem about to be solved. I had the system, I had the data, and I had the will to find the flaw. Order would be restored. On the console, just to the left of the display, sat a single inert data chip. It was a standard memory wafer, a simple piece of solid-state hardware. As I watched, it changed. Without a sound, its outer casing of grey polymer remained perfectly intact, but the tiny, complex architecture of its internal circuits, the microscopic transistors and delicate pathways, appeared on the surface of the console next to it. They were laid out in a perfect, intricate schematic, not a single component broken. The chip was still whole, but its insides were now on the outside. I stared, my mind refusing to process the sensory input. It was a miniature, silent, and utterly faithful echo of the murder. I classified the rising sensation in my chest as an unproductive emotional response. But for the first time in a very long time, I looked at a problem and felt the unfamiliar emptiness of a man who did not have a single hypothesis left. I held my breath. A physiological response, inefficient. My focus remained on the data chip and its dissembled guts, laid out like a sacrifice on the console's dark glass. My first instinct was to touch it, to verify the physical reality of the event. I resisted. Uncontrolled variables are the enemy of good data. My mind raced, building and discarding explanations with frantic speed. A localized energy surge from the console. It would have been logged, a visual artifact from the ship's holographic interface. I ran a diagnostic on the projector. It came back clean. A hallucination? My own sensory apparatus then. I ran my personal biomonitor. Heart rate elevated but within acceptable stress parameters. No neural anomalies. No signs of cognitive failure. The evidence was clear. The chip had experienced the same violation as the ambassador. Reality had just performed the same magic trick twice. The following days I barely slept. I subsisted on nutrient paste from the command center's auto chef, a bland, efficient fuel that tasted of nothing. My entire world became the numbers. I was an archaeologist digging through a mountain of digital bedrock, searching for a single fossilized error. The deep core audit yielded nothing. It was worse than finding corruption. The data was perfect. Every energy fluctuation, every system query, every nanosecond of the ship's voyage was accounted for and correct. The logs were a monument to flawless operation. My Aegis protocol had worked exactly as designed. The ship was a perfect sealed box. The more certain I became of the system's integrity, the more insane the crime became. It was like proving a room had no doors and then being asked to explain the man who had just walked in. Frustration was a cognitive contaminant, a hot pressure behind my eyes. I pushed it down and kept working. It was on the third cycle of my audit, as I was cross-referencing temporal data against the ship's inertial dampeners, that it happened. I was staring at a waterfall of code on the main screen when a movement caught the edge of my vision. Ambassador Court, dressed in his immaculate uniform, walked calmly down the main access corridor to my right. I didn't startle. I simply turned my head, my mind already accessing the relevant logs. I saw him for a full 3 seconds, his measured pace, the way the light glinted off the medals on his chest before he rounded a corner and vanished. He was a perfect visual record. I queried Stellan instantly. Confirm life signs in Corridor 7B. Negative, Architect. The AI responded. There are no life signs in that sector. There have been no life signs. My own biomonitor registered a spike in adrenaline, a stress-induced visual anomaly, a waking dream brought on by exhaustion. It was the only logical conclusion. My own mind, the human element, was becoming the system's most unreliable component. It was a humiliating thought. A priority channel overrode my console. An icon bloomed in the air, the sigil of the Diplomatic Corps Special Operations. It was my superior, Director Garris. His face materialized, sharp and impatient. Lorien, your report is overdue. We need a culpable party. Was it a Signon operative, a corporate asset from the outer colonies? Give me a target. My investigation is ongoing, Director, I replied. The data is inconsistent. Inconsistent is not an acceptable answer, Garris snapped. The Union is already leveraging this as a sign of consortium instability. I need an assassin to blame, not a physics problem. Find me a ghost in the machine, Lorien, and find him yesterday. The connection closed, leaving silence in its wake. Find a ghost in the machine. The phrase, meant as a figure of speech, landed like a stone. Garris wanted a simple, logical answer. But logic had failed. And when your own tools fail, you have to find new ones, even if you have to dig them out of the garbage heap of scientific heresy. I commanded Stellan to open a channel to the Master Academic Archives. I began searching for fringe theories using keywords I would have scorned a week ago. Non-local extraction, spatial delamination, ontological weaponry. Most of it was pseudo-scientific nonsense. But then one entry caught my eye. A paper buried deep in a defunct journal of theoretical physics, written by a Dr. Ewan Hemlock. The title was On Topological Fragility and Bulk Permeability. I read the abstract. It proposed that space-time wasn't uniform, that it had weak points, fault lines that could, under certain energy conditions, become temporarily permeable to higher dimensional realities. It was madness, scientific mysticism, but it was the only theory I had found that didn't just bend the rules of physics, but suggested an entirely different rulebook. I found Hemlock's public contact code, a sinecure as a university archivist, a post for a man put out to pasture. Desperate, I sent the call. An old man's face appeared on my screen, thin and lined, with eyes that were simultaneously tired and intensely sharp. Dr. Ewan Hemlock. Who is asking? He said, his voice dry as old paper. Architect Rhys Lorien, Diplomatic Corps. I'm investigating a phenomenon aboard the courier Stellatus. It appears consistent with the framework outlined in your paper. Hemlock gave a small, weary smile. It wasn't a happy expression. Consistent. What a wonderfully sterile word. You mean someone finally broke a window they didn't know was there? He leaned closer to his screen, his eyes studying me. You are an engineer, Mr. Lorien. You're looking for a blueprint of the house. I am telling you that you are trapped inside a poem and you need to learn how to read. Doctor, I said, my patience fraying, I need data, a verifiable hypothesis. The universe is not a machine, Architect. It is a text, and its grammar is far stranger than you believe. You're dealing with a fold, a topological bleed, a place where the wall between our reality and another has worn thin. Your ship isn't malfunctioning, it's dreaming. Now the question is, what is the subject of the dream? This was a waste of time. I was dealing with a senile poet. "Thank you for your time, Doctor," I said, preparing to cut the connection. "Don't look for the killer, Mr. Lorien," Hemlock said, his voice stopping me. "You'll only lose your mind. Map the dream. Stop trying to debug the ship and start observing its new behavior. The architecture is your only reliable data now. Watch how the rooms change." I closed the channel, my own anger a hot flush on my skin. The architecture is your only reliable data now. Utter nonsense. I needed to get back to the command center, to my own logic, my own systems. I stood and walked down the main access corridor I had come from, the one where I had seen the ghost of Court. The corridor was exactly as it should be. Featureless, clean, logical. I reached the door at the end and it slid open at my approach. But behind it was not the tiered amphitheater of the command center. It was a small, cramped supply closet I had never seen before. Metal shelves lined the walls, filled with sealed nutrient packs and canisters of cleaning solvents. There was no other door. It was a dead end. I stood there, staring into the closet. I had just walked 20 meters down a straight corridor that I knew led to the ship's heart. But it didn't. Not anymore. The ship had lied to me, and in the sudden ringing silence of the closet, I heard the old man's words in my head. "Watch how the rooms change." I turned around. The corridor was gone. Behind me was a solid, seamless wall, identical to the other three. I was sealed inside a box, a space carved out of the ship's known architecture. My first reaction was a jolt of pure animal panic, a claustrophobic spike that I ruthlessly suppressed, an unproductive, emotional response. I forced myself to analyze. The closet was real. The shelves, the canisters, the chemical smell. It was all physically present. I ran my hand along the wall where the door had been. It was solid. There was no seam, no telltale energy signature of a holographic projection. This wasn't a trick. It was a transposition. A piece of the ship had been remapped. Hemlock's words came back again, this time not as the ramblings of a mystic, but as accurate diagnosis. The architecture was the data. I was no longer an investigator auditing a system. I was a lab rat in a maze that was actively reconfiguring itself around me. My life's work was built on the premise that A leads to B. Here, A led to a supply closet that wasn't on any blueprint. I had no choice. If the standard pathways were unreliable, I had to use the ship's arteries. I found the access panel for the Jefferies tubes, the network of cramped maintenance crawl spaces that crisscrossed the vessel's superstructure. The panel opened, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel filled with insulated conduits and fiber-optic cabling. The clinical silence of the upper decks gave way to the visceral thrum of the ship's power systems. It was a space I knew from schematics, but had never intended to enter. On my hands and knees, I began to crawl. The journey was a slow, agonizing process of navigating by memory. My goal was a junction box near the engineering core where I could manually override the internal sensors and get a true picture of the ship's current layout. I rounded a corner in the tube and froze. 10 meters ahead, illuminated by a single maintenance light, a man in a standard engineering jumpsuit was crouched, his back to me. He was working on an open access panel, the same one I was heading for. For a split second, my mind surged with something I hadn't felt in days: relief, a human explanation, a stowaway, a saboteur, a tangible problem I knew how to solve. "Don't move," I said, my voice flat and authoritative. "Identify yourself, you're not on the manifest." The man didn't turn. He muttered, his voice tired and muffled by the confined space. Yeah, almost done. Just running the final cascade check. I'll be off before she seals for departure." He fumbled with a tool, and a hydrospanner clattered to the metal floor. The sound was real. The man was solid. but his words struck a chord of pure dread. Before she seals for departure. That was days ago. What did you say? The man ignored me, as if I hadn't spoken. He finished his work, closed the panel with a satisfying click, and then said in the same tired voice, Yeah, almost done. Just running the final cascade check. I'll be off before she seals for departure. He fumbled with an invisible tool in his hand. The exact same clatter of a hydrospanner hitting the floor sounded in the narrow tube, but this time, nothing had fallen. I watched, paralyzed, as the figure's edges began to lose their sharpness, blurring and becoming momentarily translucent. Through the man's torso, I could see the complex bundled wiring of the conduit wall behind him. He was a perfect recording of a moment, a ghost made of time itself. He repeated his line, his actions, and the phantom sound of the falling tool, trapped in a four-dimensional loop. My mind, snapping out of its paralysis, did the only thing it knew how to do. It queried the system. Through my personal comms, I had Stellan search the pre-flight maintenance logs. Keywords: cascade check, final departure seal. The result came back instantly, a data packet sent directly to my neural interface. It was a single entry, final cascade diagnostic logged by Technician Second Class Samuel Jones. Status: incomplete. Technician did not clock out. Samuel Jones. The Echo had a name and a documented bureaucratic reason for being here. He was a low-level technician, accidentally sealed inside. A minor, undocumented failure, a rounding error in the personnel logs of the very Aegis protocol I had designed. The cosmic horror was suddenly underpinned by a mundane bureaucratic error. This ghost wasn't just a symptom of the fold. It was an indictment. The flawless system I had built was flawed from the very beginning. I backed away slowly, the man, the Echo, flickering through his loop again and again. The ship wasn't just a container for a single crime. It was a haunted space, a tomb where multiple layers of reality were decaying at once. This changed everything. I wasn't just dealing with an environmental hazard, I was being watched. The feeling solidified as I crawled away. A persistent, unshakable feeling of being observed, not by a person, but by the very space around me. The geometry of the tube was looking at me. As if to prove the point, the tool I was carrying, a simple magnetic driver, lifted from my belt. It floated in the air before me, suspended. Then, with quiet precision, it disassembled. Its casing split, its power cell drifted out, its magnetic coil unwound, each screw and diode separating and arranging itself in a perfect, exploded diagram in the air. It hung there for a moment, a lesson in object-oriented physics, before the components smoothly reassembled themselves into a single, seamless whole. It dropped back into my open palm, warm to the touch. This wasn't chaos. This was controlled, purposeful. An intelligence was at work, an intelligence that was now clearly aware of me. It was demonstrating its nature, showing me the rules. I scrambled through the tubes until I found an intact command interface. I didn't care where I was. I opened the channel to Hemlock. His face appeared, his expression weary, as if he'd been waiting. "It's not just an environment," I said, the words coming out fast, stripped of all my usual precision. "It's interactive. It's showing me things. It's taking things apart." Hemlock listened, his expression unchanging. He nodded slowly. "Of course, the fold is the window. You've attracted the attention of what's on the other side. What you're seeing isn't hostility, it's curiosity. You are a novel system, and it is trying to understand you. We have a classification for it, though it's purely theoretical," Hemlock said. "A xenotopological entity. I call it the surveyor. Think of it not as a creature, but as a sentient, self-aware theorem of geometry. A consciousness made of pure mathematics. It's ancient, patient, and utterly amoral. It's a scientist, Mr. Lorian, and you are strapped to its examination table." As he spoke, The lights in the tube around me dimmed. A cold light began to glow on the smooth wall of the main conduit beside me. Lines of frost were spreading across the metal, coalescing into patterns. They weren't random, they were equations, complex, elegant, and utterly alien. Mathematical expressions for four-dimensional physics appearing on the wall of a ship that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The surveyor was communicating. "Stellan," I whispered, calling to the ship's AI. "Analyze." But the voice that responded was not Stellan's calm, modulated tone. It was a synthesized cascade of numbers and theorems. The integral of a closed n form over the boundary of an orientable n+1 dimensional manifold is equal to the integral of its exterior derivative over the whole manifold. Conclusion: a boundary is without boundary. It was speaking in pure mathematical proofs. The sickness had finally consumed my perfect logical machine. The geometry of the room, the ship, the universe, it was all looking at me. And I had the sudden, horrifying certainty that for the surveyor to fully understand me, it might have to take me apart, just as it had the ambassador. The voice of the AI, now a stream of alien logic, was the final breaking point. My fortress of reason, the last bastion of my old self, had been conquered. The surveyor wasn't just outside. It was inside the code, inside the system, inside the very axioms of the world I had built. My tools were not my own anymore. A new kind of fear bloomed. It wasn't the panic of being trapped or the dread of the unknown. It was the specific intellectual terror of a man watching his own mind become an obsolete instrument. The system architect was dead. All that was left was Rhys Lorien, a bug in a machine he couldn't comprehend. "Hemlock," I said into the open comms channel. "What do I do?" "You adapt." Hemlock's voice came back, steady as a rock in a tidal wave. "Stop thinking like an engineer trying to fix a broken circuit. Start thinking like a cartographer mapping a new continent. The phenomena you're witnessing aren't random attacks. They are the currents and tides of this new reality. The surveyor isn't trying to kill you. It's trying to teach you its language." His words were a lifeline, but a strange one. He wasn't telling me how to fight, but how to listen. I pushed myself away from the frosted equations and the babbling AI interface. I had to move. I had to test Hemlock's theory. If the ship's architecture was a form of communication, I had to learn to read it. I began crawling again, but this time my purpose was different. I wasn't trying to get somewhere specific. I was trying to observe the path itself. I started using the ship's internal sensors to map the anomalies. I pulled up a schematic of the ship on my personal datapad, watching as the real-time layout deviated from the master blueprint. Corridors would stretch, rooms would migrate, entire sections would momentarily vanish from the sensors before reappearing somewhere else. It was like watching a living thing breathe. And slowly, I began to see a pattern. The shifts responded to my presence, my movements. The maze was watching me solve it. I found a new path back to the upper decks, emerging into a wide observation lounge I hadn't been in before. The main viewport, a wall of seamless black, was supposed to show the starfield outside. Instead, it was displaying a three-dimensional star chart. But the constellations were wrong. They were changing, reconfiguring themselves into complex topological diagrams, Klein bottles and four-dimensional hypercubes rendered in points of light. It was another lesson. Another sentence in the surveyor's language. I walked to the control panel for the viewport. My old instinct would have been to shut it down, to try and force it back to its default state. Instead, guided by Hemlock's strange wisdom, I engaged the holographic projector. I didn't try to override the alien display. I added to it. I called up a simple program, a rendering of a perfect Euclidean cube. It shimmered into existence, floating in front of the surveyor's complex geometry. The reaction was immediate. The hypercube on the screen paused its rotation. The surveyor's attention, which had felt like a crushing weight, now felt inquisitive. It was considering my response. After a long moment, my simple cube began to unfold, its sides pulling apart and reconfiguring themselves, demonstrating how a 3D object can be flattened into a 2D net. It was a dialogue, a terrifyingly simple, elegant dialogue. My confidence grew, a tiny, fragile shoot in the wreckage of my old certainty. I wasn't a specimen anymore. I was a participant. The surveyor's next test came swiftly. I left the observation lounge and walked into a small nexus of corridors. All 5 doorways, including the one I had just come through, now led back into the very same nexus. I would walk through a door and find myself standing exactly where I had started, facing the other 4 doors. It was a perfect spatial loop. A trap. My first thought was raw frustration, but I forced it down, remembering the lesson. It wasn't a prison, it was a problem. A riddle posed in the language of geometry. I stood in the center of the room, closed my eyes, and focused on the feeling of the space, the subtle wrongness of it. The surveyor had bypassed 3-dimensional space to connect these doorways, but the connection had to exist somewhere. A seam, a wrinkle in the fabric. I paced the room, running my hand along the walls where the doors met the frame. On the 5th doorway, I felt a minute, almost imperceptible temperature differential. A line of cold no wider than a thread. It was the conceptual stitch holding the loop together. I focused all my attention on that line of cold, on the idea of the seam. I took a step, not through the doorway, but at it, aiming for the floor itself. For a disorienting instant, the world dissolved into a smear of color and light. I felt a gut-wrenching lurch, and then my feet were on solid ground. I was standing in the main command center. The body of Ambassador Court and his perfectly arranged organs were exactly as I had left them. I had solved the puzzle. Panting, I opened the comms channel again. "Hemlock, I'm through. I solved its trap." "Good," Hemlock said. There was a new note in his voice. Not respect, perhaps, but the satisfaction of a teacher whose student has finally grasped a difficult concept. "You're learning to see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. But the surveyor's curiosity will only deepen. It will want to know more about the system that is you. Its tests will become more intimate. To fully model you, it will need to know your structure." The implication was horrifyingly clear. It would want to take me apart. "There must be a way to stop it," I said. There was a long pause from Hemlock's end. "You cannot fight a hurricane, Architect. You can only find shelter. You cannot out-logic a being made of logic, but every system, no matter how complex, has limitations defined by its own nature. Its strengths are its weaknesses. Its perspective is its prison." He paused again, and the words that came next changed the course of my life. An entity existing in 4 dimensions would be conceptually blind to a perfect 2-dimensional plane. It lacks the axis to perceive true flatness. The idea sparked in my mind, a flash of lightning in the dark. It was a paradigm shift. I couldn't fight it in its world, but I could create a condition in mine to which it was blind. My skills as a system architect, my intimate, obsessive knowledge of energy fields, signal propagation, and holographic projection were suddenly not obsolete. They were the key. I knew what I had to do. It was a desperate, lateral thinking gambit, a plan born from a fusion of Hemlock's metaphysical poetry and my own ruthless engineering logic. A way to make myself and this entire ship disappear. The core was the most stable part of the ship, a heavily shielded sphere deep in the engineering section that housed Stellan's SAC. It was a temple to pure logic, suspended in a magnetic field and cryo-cooled to near absolute zero. It was the one place on the ship where I could access the power distribution and system controls I needed. My journey there was a conscious navigation of the dream. When a corridor would warp, I would wait, sensing the rhythm of the fold, and choose a path that flowed with the current, not against it. The surveyor's attention was a constant pressure, a silent, inquisitive weight. It seemed to perceive my new purpose, its passive observation intensifying as if it knew I was heading toward a final, fascinating act. I reached the shielded entrance to the core chamber. The massive vault door, designed to withstand a direct torpedo strike, slid open at my command. The air inside was freezing. In the center of the chamber, the sentient adjacent core hung like a black pearl, its surface inert and cold. This was the only place on the ship the surveyor's influence hadn't fully penetrated. Here the rules were still my own. I accessed the single maintenance console. The plan was terrifyingly simple in its concept, but monstrously complex in its execution. I needed to reroute nearly all of the ship's primary power to the dozens of holographic emitters embedded in the outer hull, the ones designed to project diplomatic symbols or mimic the appearance of other vessels. As I worked, the surveyor's presence became stronger, a focused beam of observation. It knew I was manipulating the ship's most fundamental systems. The pressure in my skull intensified. I felt a strange, dissociative sensation, a feeling of my own physical form becoming delaminated, a phantom echo of what Court must have felt. My thoughts, my memories, my very sense of self felt as if they were being read, not as emotions but as electrical and logical patterns. It was the surveyor's final, most intimate examination. I was no longer a black box. It was opening me. I worked faster, my focus absolute. The fear was a clean, cold fuel. I bypassed safety protocols, shunted power from non-essential systems, and pushed the emitters far beyond their designed limits. The ship groaned around me, the structure vibrating as immense energy was redirected through its arteries. I felt a profound change in the fabric of the ship. Through the console's external camera feed, I watched the stars outside vanish. They were replaced by a seamless, featureless, two-dimensional plane of pure white light. A flat field, as Hemlock would call it. We had enveloped the stellators in a perfect 2D projection, a state of being so conceptually alien to a 4D entity that we had, in effect, ceased to exist from its perspective. The crushing weight of the surveyor's observation vanished. The silence in my mind was sudden and total. It was like a deafening noise had abruptly stopped. We were unobserved. We were invisible. But the field wouldn't hold for long. I had mere seconds. With the surveyor's influence momentarily gone, Stellan's core programming reasserted itself. The stream of mathematical proofs on the console was replaced by a single blinking red alert. FTL drive ready. I slammed my hand on the activation panel. Phase tunneling, our method of faster-than-light travel, didn't break the light barrier. They created a localized tunnel of compressed space-time, a cosmic shortcut. Activating the drive inside the unstable region of the fold was an act of supreme desperation. The ship screamed, a violent shudder running through its entire structure as two incompatible forms of reality-bending physics tore at each other. The world outside the viewport, still projecting the flat field, dissolved into a maelstrom of pure, chaotic energy. I was thrown against the console, my vision whiting out as the stellators was violently pushed, ripped, and ejected from the fold. The re-entry into normal space-time was brutal. The ship dropped out of FTL with a jolt that felt like hitting a solid wall. Red alerts flared across every console. The power died. The lights went out. The only illumination was the distant light of the real stars, now visible once more through the viewport. The ship was adrift, and I, inside it, was free. I sat there in the dark of the command center, the body of Ambassador Court and his neatly arranged organs lost to the gloom, and simply floated in the quiet. Time lost its meaning until a hard jolt shook the deck plates. It was followed by the loud metallic shock of a mag clamp biting into the hull. The sound was brutal, mechanical, and wonderfully, blessedly mundane. A recovery vessel. I heard the hiss of an airlock being forced, then the heavy, magnetized tread of boots in the corridor. Figures in bulky evacuation suits entered the command center, their forms silhouetted against the light from their entry point. Beams from their shoulder-mounted lamps cut sharp, white paths through the gloom, sweeping across the deck and finally landing on me. The light was painfully bright. "By the stars," one of them said, his voice tinny over his suit's external speaker. His light had found the tableau around Court's throne. Another beam fixed on me. "Architect Lorien, we're from the patrol cutter Vigil. Can you confirm your identity?" I didn't answer right away. I was looking at them, at their functional suits and their cautious stances, and seeing emissaries from a world I no longer fully inhabited. They saw a man in shock, a ship dead in space, a bizarre crime scene. They couldn't see the silent, screaming truth of what had happened here. They couldn't see the hole that had been burned through my reality. "Lorien!" The voice prompted, sharper this time. I finally found my own voice. It felt like an instrument I hadn't played in years. "Confirmed," I said. They moved toward me. One of them knelt, his mirrored faceplate reflecting a distorted image of my own tired face. "Are you injured, sir? What happened here?" "The ship is completely dead." I looked past him, through the viewport, at the indifferent stars. The lie began to form, a necessary piece of architecture I would have to build to protect a world that couldn't handle the truth. It had to be logical. It had to be something they could file in a report. The drive coil cascaded, I heard myself say. The technical jargon, a comforting, familiar shield. A chain reaction. It took the whole system down. It was a good lie. Plausible. Final. It explained the dead ship and my own disheveled state. It explained everything except the one thing that mattered. "All right, architect," the man said, accepting it. "Let's get you out of here." He helped me to my feet. As they led me away from the command throne and toward the light of their ship, I didn't look back. The image of Court's body, the memory of the surveyor's attention, and the vast knowledge of the fold were no longer on the ship. They were inside me now, a permanent part of my own internal architecture. My official report was accepted. It was a dense, technical document filled with falsified sensor logs and speculative energy field dynamics, a carefully constructed fiction that was, in its own way, my final masterpiece of system architecture. The diplomatic corps was relieved. They had their explanation, a freak accident, a tragic but understandable loss. Ambassador Court became a martyr to the perils of deep space exploration, and I became the sole, traumatized survivor. They gave me a commendation for maintaining my composure and salvaging the ship's data core. The commendation sits in a drawer I never open. The Stellatus was decommissioned. Towed to a secure orbital facility, it was dissected by engineers who, following the logic of my report, looked for flaws in the FTL drive. They found none, of course, but they found enough anomalous energy signatures, the lingering ghosts of the fold, to satisfy their investigation. The ship was eventually scuttled, broken down into its component atoms in a plasma furnace. They thought they were destroying a machine. I know they were burying a scar on the face of reality. I resigned my position. I could no longer, in good faith, design security systems. It felt like building sandcastles against a tide I knew was coming. My life's work, the creation of perfect, impenetrable walls, was predicated on a lie, that the universe we inhabit is the only one there is. The only person I speak to with any honesty is Ewan Hemlock. Our calls are infrequent, but essential. We are the sole members of a very exclusive club, two men who have stared into the source code of the universe and seen that it is not written in a language we can ever hope to master. He never said, "I told you so." The validation he had sought for decades had finally arrived, not in a blaze of public glory, but in the quiet, terrified testimony of a single man. His academic exile is for him a kind of peace. He has his books, his theories, and now one confirmed data point: me. He and I are collaborating on a new project. It is not about building walls, but about listening for tremors. We are designing a new kind of sensor, one that doesn't look for energy or matter, but for inconsistencies in causality. We are trying to build the first seismograph for reality itself. It is, I suspect, a fool's errand, an attempt to impose a new kind of order on something that defies it. But it is the only work that has any meaning for me now. I still live in my apartment. The surfaces are still clean, the lines are still sharp, the order is still absolute, but the perfection of it is no longer a comfort. It is a facade. It is a thin coat of paint on a wall I know is porous. I look at simple, solid objects and see them for what they are. Temporary agreements. On my desk sits a paperweight, a perfect sphere of polished steel. Before the stellatas, I would have seen its mass, its density, its flawless, unbroken surface. A simple, solid fact. Now I see a boundary. I am quietly, terrifyingly aware of the other direction I cannot see. The fourth axis. A direction from which one could reach inside the sphere and pluck out its core, leaving behind a hollow shell that is still, to all outward appearances, perfect and untouched. The object would become a lie, an empty promise of solidity. Most days, the knowledge is just a gentle static in the back of my mind, the ghost of a dead AI speaking in numbers. But sometimes, like now, I can almost feel the geometry of the room looking at me. I can feel the sublime, patient curiosity of the surveyor, a brushstroke of attention across the void. And I feel a cognitive shiver, a tremor in the foundations of my world, a reminder that the membrane between what is and what could be is fragile, and it is always listening.